Hi, my name is Catherine. Thank you for joining us here at Love Handles Kitchen. First, I want to say thank you for stopping by my channel. You're here for a reason. So it looks like today we're going to start making gluten-free cookies. Now I'm going to take your basic chocolate chip cookie recipe and I'm going to show you the differences and how they work. First, we're going to start off with a regular batch. I'll demonstrate all that for you. Then we're going to see what happens if you add extra flour to the batch, if you use all brown sugar, if you use all granulated sugar, if you use melted butter, and then I also have a different baking ratio gluten-free flour. My first standard gluten-free flour is going to be Bob's Red Mill all-purpose flour, and with that you actually need to add xanthan gum, and I found this really great article that explains the difference why you would need to use that, so I'll put that in the link below. Go ahead and do some research. A lot of really great information there. And then we're also going to do their 1-to-1 baking flour ratio where we won't need the xanthan gum. This is all the same exact recipe. There's 6 different ones. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first with our cookie recipe, we're going to use the creaming method. So that means is that we're going to put all of our dry ingredients in one, we're going to put all of our wet ingredients in another, and then we're going to cream our butter and our sugar together until it's light and fluffy. So I'm going to first start off by measuring my ingredients. Now, some people use a standard measuring cup. It's totally fine if you like to do that. I, though, happen to do my recipes in grams because you get the same exact weight every single time. Now, if you tell somebody to give me a cup of brown sugar, it can weigh 2 different ways, depending on if you pack it and level it or if you just loosely scoop it. So when I give my weight measurements, it's always the same every single time, and there's no need to get confused on that one. So I'm gonna go ahead and first put my bowl on here, and then I'm gonna zero out my scale. Now this is just a regular digital scale. You could get that in the kitchen aisle at any grocery store. And then this is our gluten-free flour mixture from Bob's Red Mill. So we're gonna go ahead and start off with this. It's gonna be 485 grams of flour. Now for each cup of flour you use, you're gonna put 1/4 of a teaspoon of your xanthan gum. Okay, so roughly 485 grams is gonna be about 4 cups of flour. So you'll need a teaspoon of your xanthan gum. So we're just gonna measure this out. So 1 scoop was 306, and it's okay if you have a little bit more or a little less at first, but we need to get that 485 grams total. And almost there, perfect, 485. And the reason why I know that that's 4 cups roughly is that I also measured it with my standard measuring 1 cup mixture until I got to 485, which was roughly 4 cups, depending on if you went a rounded cup or a flat cup at that time. So once again, we need 1/4 of a teaspoon per cup. So I'm just gonna measure with my 1/4 a teaspoon. 1, and they're just nice and level. 2, 3, and 4. All right, now from here in our dry ingredients, we're also gonna add in our baking powder, baking soda, and salt. That would be the rest of our dry ingredients. And I use kosher salt. I don't know if it makes a difference for people, but this is what I always cook with and bake with, so I always have kosher salt on hand. So we need about 1.5 teaspoons of kosher salt, which is roughly about 6 grams. So I'm gonna go ahead and zero out my scale, because we always wanna start off fresh, right? When we're adding new stuff to the bowl, we wanna always zero it out. All right, there we go. We got our salt. I'm gonna zero that out. I'm gonna grab my baking soda, which is 1.4 teaspoons, and then our baking powder, which is 1.5 teaspoons. And when I measure, I always level it out. So you can see I use the side of my container here, and it's a nice even level scoop. Now you can go ahead and stir this together either using a spatula, a whisk. I personally like to sift it together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a piece of parchment paper and my sifter. So we're going to take all of our dry ingredients, and then we're just going to give this a nice little tap. We don't want to go too high because we don't want this all over the place. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sift this too. Now, I also have a different couple of methods as well too. You can use one of these, which is a nice little flour shifter as well. You just squeeze this handle and it comes out, depending on which one you like. I just find that it's easier, but they just come out like this. I don't really like using this as much because you can see that there's a lot of residual leftovers in there, and that's stuff that we actually need. So I try not to use these. This way I could actually see what's going on. So we're gonna go ahead and just sift this all together. Sometimes Sometimes it goes by a little bit easier if you have something to push it through. Whatever your preference. Do what you're comfortable with, what works for you. Now you can also give this a double sift, which means that you can run it through one more time and see how well this goes. To get it nice and incorporated, we just want all of this out. And depending on what type of salt you use, you might have chunks of salt in there. So you got to be careful on that you don't have really coarse salt. You kind of want a nice meshed one. You see as my salt is right there, it's not really incorporated now. So we're just going to give that a little sift. So once it's all sifted, we're going to go ahead and put that in here. And then we're going to go ahead and move into our butter and our sugar. So because we're doing the creaming method, we want to start off with our butter first. Now I'm going to just do the regular recipe. So I use cold butter for that, or you could use room temperature butter. It just depends. If you do choose to use the cold butter, it just takes a little bit longer of a whipping time. We're also going to show you the version with the melted butter as well, so you could see that. I'm going to take this off here. I'm going to put it on my scale, and I'm first going to measure out our butter. We're going to have 285 grams of butter. All right, so here's our butter, and we're just going to measure that out. Okay, so I have 285 grams of my unsalted butter, just nice and cubed here. I'm going to go ahead and get that started. I'm going to go ahead, because it is cold. My mixer is with the paddle attachment here. When you're using a creaming method, you always want to use a paddle attachment. Now when you use a whisk, that's only appropriate for when you're trying to really incorporate air into your batter. We don't need to do this. It's just a cookie recipe. Now if we were doing like an angel food cake and whipping egg whites, that's when we'll need the whisk. But this is just my paddle attachment. So I'm going to go ahead and let that start while I measure out my sugars. All right, so we're going to get our granulated sugar first. We need 228 grams of our sugar. We have 228 grams of sugar, and then we're going to go ahead and do our brown sugar, which is 285 grams of regular sugar. Now it looks like our butter is doing nice and good in here. It's breaking up all the chunks. It's nice and smooth, which is great. Here we have our brown sugar, and we're going to go 285 grams. Okay, I'm going to zero out my scale because this is all going to go together, so we don't need to worry about mixing it or separating it because it's our sugar. But I don't want to add on to that weight and have to calculate if I added enough, so I just started at 0. All right, 285. I got 272. That was pretty close. Perfect. We got 285 right here. Now, before we add our sugar, we always want to make sure that we have a spatula, and we're going to go ahead and scrape the sides. Even though my paddle attachment has a spatula attached to it, I want to make sure that we're really getting it incorporated. So I'm just going to stop it here, unlock my lid, make sure we get all of this off, and we're also going to get on the sides too, because we don't want all of that stuff stuck to the sides. As much as I love butter, I don't want a chunk of it in my cookie, which it would probably melt, and then you'll just have a pocket of butter. Making sure we get even the bottom of that bowl. I'm just going to set this gently here, and then I'm going to add in a little bit of our sugar at a time. I don't like to add it all at once. Now the greatest thing about the creaming method, you can let your butter and your sugar go and go and go and go and go. You don't have to worry about it, because the purpose is that we want it nice, light, and fluffy and incorporated. Now as soon as we start adding things like our egg or our flour, that's where we can't go, and we can't let it over mix is what we call that, because then you'll get a really tough chewy cookie, and nobody wants that. We want a chewy cookie for good reasons. All right, once again I'm going to go ahead and stop that, make sure that my middle section is all done. We're incorporating enough of our ingredients, and you can even do this step first and start creaming your butter and sugar while you're measuring and sifting out your dry ingredients. Totally fine to skip that. I'm going to add in some more sugar. You can kind of see in this dough here, it's crumbling a little bit, and that's fine, but we want it to be nice and light and fluffy. So we're going to keep letting this go. And I can see that it's stuck to the bottom a little bit, so I'm going to lift this up, and I want to make sure that I'm really getting in there, because I want all of this incorporated nice and good. And see how nice and crumbly this is? That's fine. Our sugar is not incorporated yet though, so we want it nice, light, and fluffy. All right, so there are no holes or chunks at the bottom of my bowl. And then we want to go ahead and add in the rest of our sugar, and we're going to let this go. Now I do apologize for the way that my KitchenAid sounds. It is one of the first generation KitchenAids. It's been around for at least 20 years. It was my mother's, so it's made lots and lots and lots of cakes and cookies and pies and treats and all kinds of fun stuff. So all right, so here's a good consistency. You can see our batter is all nice and together. You can go ahead and continue to whip this more. It's totally fine. It's up to you. I'm just gonna call it good here because I've already measured out all my ingredients. Once again, I'm gonna always make sure that before I am incorporating any new ingredient, that I'm fully mixing everything that's underneath. Now, when it gets to adding your eggs and your flour, you don't want to over mix this, so it's going to be really crucial that you don't play with it too much. But with this, I want to make sure that we have our butter and sugar in here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to add in 1 egg at a time. Now, I like to personally put mine in separate bowls because I like to make sure that there's nothing wrong with my eggs, such as getting eggshells in them, or if your egg has blood or a double yolk, you want to make sure that it is a single egg. Now, these are our large eggs here from the grocery store. All right, and that is a good egg, so we could go ahead and use that one, and that one is pretty good too here. But sometimes you'll get a double yolk or you'll get blood in there, and if you do have blood, I personally don't like to use them, but we're gonna go ahead and do 1 egg at a time. I also like this method because it helps me add in 1 egg at a time. And we're gonna go on a slower speed, and I want this nice and incorporated. And before I add in my second one, I want to scrape down my bowl as well to make sure that that is fully incorporated. You can see as this is starting to loosen up when we add our eggs, it's not as tight or crumbly. This will have less of a sand feel and more of a sticky Play-Doh feel. Always picking up the bowl because there is a little groove in here. I'll go ahead and show you. You can see this bottom groove here. We want to make sure that we're getting that part as well so that nothing is stuck underneath that. There we go. Nice and good here. Make sure we scrape that off because we don't want the extras hanging out on our spatula. And of course, always scraping down our hook as well to make sure that we are getting all those sections up here that it likes to stick on. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and lock it, and we're gonna put in our second yolk. Now, while that's mixing, you can go ahead and clean up your area if you want. All right, so what I'm gonna do is that this is slowly incorporated. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up the speed just a little bit, and that way I can see it that it's nice and fluffy as well. So after this, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in our vanilla, which is 2 teaspoons. You wanna add that to your wet ingredients before you put in your dry ingredients. Now, there are plenty of chocolate chip recipes here. If you wanna go ahead and try those, or your favorite ones. I just personally see that this is a very nice cookie that I get, very consistent. But I also grew up just eating the chocolate chip cookie recipe off of the Toll House chocolate chips. You can use that recipe as well. Just remember that if you are using gluten-free flour, there is going to be a little bit of differences in that kind of texture as well. We are going to make sure that you add in your xanthan gum if you're using an all-purpose gluten-free flour. And remember, that is 1/4 of a teaspoon per 1 cup flour. All right, see how that's nice and tacky? We like that. Kind of like peanut butter. All right, so now we're gonna add in our vanilla to our egg, butter, and sugar mixture. Now this is 2 teaspoons. I like to use pure vanilla. I don't like imitation. I feel like you get a better flavor, and also I know exactly what's in there. You can also use a vanilla bean paste. There's lots of different varieties of this out here. For my normal baking, I do use the paste, but today for the cookies and for my frostings, I'm just gonna use the extract. Once again, that's 2 teaspoons. We just want a nice level teaspoon. We're gonna let that mix. All right, so then now what we're gonna do is we're gonna reduce this to a nice low speed, and we're gonna introduce our flour. We want this until it's just combined. In the meantime, I'm gonna also get a cookie tray, and I'm gonna line it with parchment paper. I just always think that it's better. I don't wanna have to deal with the greasy spray. I don't want it to affect my style of cookies, so I'm just gonna use parchment paper here. And to make sure that they're all consistent, I use a ice cream scoop or a cookie scoop. I got this from Amazon. It came in a pack of 3. This is the middle size one. Another good reason why we put our flour on the parchment paper is that it's nice and easy to pick up, and we can control what's going on. I'm gonna pinch this back end here, kind of tuck it. So what I'm doing here is I'm pinching it and tucking it in so I can then pick it up, and I'm gonna add a little bit at a time. Pull back and start mixing slow. And that was just on the stir feature or number 1. Once that's incorporated, we're gonna go ahead and add in a little bit more. Now see, I added a little too much and it came flowing back out at me. So I need to make sure that I'm not overly adding in our mixture here. And then at this point, because we have a lot of flour, I'm gonna go ahead and lift the bowl up and scrape my sides. This one kind of got messy. I do apologize for that. Okay, now I also don't want to over mix this, so I really need to be careful. I'm just going to take a quick moment and wipe this down. I don't want any residual flour kind of bouncing up at me. It's also very important to kind of clean as we go here. All right, lock our mixer so we can add our mixture. Once again, coming from the side here, pinching it from down below so that way it doesn't come out. We have a nice secure area. We're gonna slowly turn this on and add in a little bit more. Not too fast because we don't want it to blow up back in our face. We also need to be careful that we're not over mixing our dough. We still have a little bit left. I'm gonna go ahead and start scraping that bottom because remember, we wanna make sure everything is fully incorporated and we don't want anything stuck below or on top like how this little flour pocket is. So I'm gonna shake that off in here first, make sure we get that nice and good, and then I'll lift that up and finish getting it out. Now I know it seems like I'm over mixing my dough a lot by constantly stopping and scraping and stopping and scraping, but we also want to make sure that there's no hidden pockets of flour down below and we have it in a nice good spot. We can add in the rest of our flour. You can also tuck in here, use your 2 fingers to pinch and then bring it up. We're going to slowly add that in. See, that last part was a little too fast and I popped out again. You got to be careful on that because we did lose some flour. All right, so this is our final step. I'm not going to mix this just yet because I want to make sure that I measure out my chocolate chips, because when I'm stirring in this last bit of flour, you can kind of see around the edges here. I'm going to do that by stirring in my chocolate chips. I personally like to stir them in. I don't like to use my mixer for that because I don't like the possibility that there are broken chips in there. Some people coat their chocolate chips in flour. When you do that, it allows your chocolate chips to kind of stay in whatever spot it gravitates to. It kind of acts like a glue, so they freeze in that spot. Or you could just toss in your chocolate chips, but there's a potential that it just might all go to the bottom. Whatever you do prefer. I'm gonna go ahead and take that off, unlock this here, wash my hands real fast, and then we'll measure out our chocolate chips. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and measure our chocolate chips. We're gonna need 570 grams of chocolate. And 570 grams is roughly 3 1/4 cups. I've previously measured this out before, so I kind of know which ones those are. And for me, each one of these chips is about a gram, half a gram. So I just take a couple of them out. I'm at 570 exactly right there. So we got all of our chocolate chips. We don't need to worry about those now. We can go ahead and put these off to the side. Like I said, you could go ahead and sprinkle these with a little bit of flour if you want them to hold specific spot. I don't really mind. They're just for my family and friends, so I just do that. So as you can see, we have the residual of all the chocolate flour, which I'm going to mix in my hand as I add in my chocolate chips. I'm going to do it in 2 stages because this is a lot of chocolate chips. So I just put roughly half of them in there. And going from around the rim, we want to make sure we get everything incorporated and we want to fold it. So folding is what we call a technique where we're lightly putting it in there. So we're gonna fold, we're gonna go around in a circle and kind of press down. You can also go from the middle and fold as well. That is just a nice consistency. As you can see though, a lot of the chocolate chips are here and not down here, so we're gonna go ahead and add in our other ones to make sure we get nice good chocolate chip to cookie ratio. Now if you want to make this an edible cookie dough, instead of your eggs, you can use condensed milk. If you want to see an edible cookie dough video though, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe to let me know exactly what you want to see. And there's really delicious milk and cookies cake using the edible cookie dough as the center. So if you want to see that that, let me know. I'd be happy to make that. Sometimes you think about cakes and you're like, ooh, that was so good. That was one of them. All right, so I got this nice and incorporated. Looks perfect. We have nothing at the bottom. They have a nice blend of chocolate chips in here. One last go. There's no extra flour. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and put our baking tray. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and line our cookies. Like I said, this is a cookie scoop. I use the middle scoop for my cookies. What I do is I normally just go ahead and scoop this, get it nice and flat. I like to kind of just scrape this off. Go ahead and put them roughly about 2 inches apart. You can do your fingers, a nice good measurement so you know where you want to go. And then go ahead and start lining those up. When you do line them up though, you want to make sure that they are nice and offset from each other so they have room to grow. You don't want to overcrowd the pan. And by offsetting, we're going to go ahead and put them in the middle. If you kind of remember in middle school, they had you touch fingertips and then someone found their window behind you. That's essentially the same process we're going to do here. Once again, making sure we put up roughly 2 inches apart from each other. We want to make sure that they have enough room to expand, but not overcrowding the pan as well. Now, have the option of freezing these as well. So when I make cookies to go ahead and save them for later, I just line them up completely. Like I don't worry about them touching sides, and I just fill this tray up as much as I can, put another sheet of parchment on top and do the same thing. Then I wrap that, I call a hotel wrap, and that is where we make sure we get the bottom and the top. And then you can let them harden in the freezer. Then once they're hard, you could go ahead and pop them in a Ziploc bag and go ahead and cook those whenever you want to have nice chocolate chip cookies. Now, if you don't have parchment paper, you can use a non-stick baking mat as well. I always have parchment paper handy, so I like to use this tool. Okay, so once this is all lined up and it's nice and offset, I'm going to go ahead and put that in a 350-degree oven for at least 8 minutes, and then we'll check the desired doneness from there. Then once these come out of the oven, we're going to go ahead and transfer that to a nice cool wire rack. Okay, so after roughly about 11 minutes in our oven, I took them out and they are a nice little golden brown. Has a nice little edge here on the bottom. It's not too dark. If you desire a little bit more doneness, go ahead and cook them for 2 to 3 minutes. I wouldn't go more than that because they could easily get burned. So this is how I like it. Very nice, good, yummy, gooey cookie. I went ahead and I tested all of the recipes. So I have here the 6 different versions. This was the regular version. You can see it's a nice thin style cookie. I believe that what happened with this is that I did overwork the dough a little bit because I was pausing and doing a lot of the video cut. So it's not ideal, but so if you do overwork it, you can get a nice little cookie like that. This one I did using all brown sugar only. You can see that it is a nice fuller cookie. Has a little bit of a different color to it, not too much of a difference though, and it has a nice good crumbly cake-like texture. Now this one I used the melted butter, which I thought was going to turn out like this one, but it ended up turning out to just kind of stay in place. I did notice though that when I was using the melted butter, the chocolate chips weren't staying as much, so it doesn't look as full with your chocolate chip, and I did have a lot that were missing. This one actually turned out to be a really good one. There's a nice blend in there, but it's not always even, and I had a bunch of chocolate chips down at my bowl, so I had to kind of work them in a little bit. So I didn't like that aspect because I want a chocolate chip cookie. I want to make sure my chocolate chips stay in there. Now also, I forgot to tell you that with the brown sugar one, it did get a little dry, so I had to add a little bit of moisture to it. So I decided to use about 1/3 cup of milk just to make sure that it had a nice good texture, because I didn't want a dry crumbly cookie. Now I have the all granulated sugar one. This one I did have the same problem with it being kind of a hard cookie, which it kind of had a nice crumble like a shortbread. All these were tested for 11 minutes, so this is at 11-minute bake for all of these cookies. You can see here that the chocolate chips were nice and even in here. This one actually looks like there was too much chocolate chips, so I might go a little bit less on this because it is a drier cookie. But I did notice, because it had a shortbread-like texture, that it was nice to make these nice giant cookies. Now these ones I just put in an 8-inch round pie pan or cake pan. You could do springform or regular. This gave me a nice good base, so I can either put this in between a layer of cake. I could put it with a cheesecake on top. I could put brownies on there. But I think what I'm gonna do with this one, because it came out with two, I'm gonna go ahead and use that as a giant ice cream sandwich cake. So I'll whip up some ice cream and put that in there. So that will be really delicious. So you get your cookies and ice cream. This is a recipe where we added too much flour. You can kind of see it looks a little shiny, almost gummy-like texture. This one was really hard on my mixer, so I did have to add some liquid. Otherwise, nothing was gonna go ahead and mix. So I added roughly about a half of cup milk, and I did a fourth of a cup at a time. And you can see that this one came out to be a perfectly nice cakey cookie, but not a cookie whatsoever. This to me is definitely a cake. So if you ever get a texture like this where it's kind of airy, little crumbly, you might have added too much flour on there. So you got to make sure that your measurements are very accurate, or you're not going to get the best cookie. And then this one I used Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour ratio. This one came out pretty nice. I didn't really have that much problems with it. It came out a little bit better than the Xanthan gum, because you can see it concaved a little bit. It's nice and sturdy, but it's very soft as well. And as you can see, the chocolate is still gooey on there. So kind of depending on what type of cookie you're in the market for, I do recommend, my personal favorite was the 1-to-1 baking flour ratio. This one's already specifically made for baking, so I didn't have to convert everything. It was pretty straightforward. I got a nice good texture with that. And all of my ingredients, my eggs and my butter, were at room temperature, except for our melted butter one, which I put in while it was still warm because it was melted. All right, well, that's it for my video today. If you did have any questions or concerns, please go ahead and comment down below, and always remember to like and subscribe. Always bake with love, from my kitchen to yours. Enjoy.
Yay.
Is it done?
It's done.